Hi, it's Wayne from howtofish.com.au, and as we move into winter, many people just hang up their rods and leave off fishing until we get into summer. But there's really no need. The fishing can be a little bit harder in winter depending on the species you're after, but there is plenty of fishing to be had if you do it right. If you have a chance to fish estuaries, then the winter is going to be a good time. The bream in particular come into spawn, and there's a lot of fish that are resident there that get more active in the colder weather. So fish like this one is fairly typical of the type of fish that you will get. But of course, if you're using the right bait and you're persistent, if you fish the incoming tide and you fish close to the top of the tide or an hour afterwards, then you can occasionally pick up on a better fish like this. Beautiful fishing, fantastic on light gear. It's a great deal of fun. Now, while there might be a lot of small fish about, every now and again something bigger will take your bait, and so you never really know what might happen. In this case here, I'd had the bait in. I wasn't paying attention, of course, but luckily I was able to turn around and catch my rod before it went in. So light gear makes this fantastic fun, and every now and again you're going to get a bit more of a surprise, like a decent pinky like this one. You don't need heavy gear for this. Smaller hooks, lighter line seems to still get those fish in. Bit of burley also helps. If you're fishing inland or if you're fishing fresh water, then the fish are still going to be about, but many species will start to close down. Our native Australian natives and redfin go quiet in the colder weather, but if you fish to structure, fish to the deeper water, you can pick up fish like this little redfin. There won't be as many about, and occasionally you can get bigger stuff like this. In the wintertime, the Victorian Fisheries Authority stocks many lakes and waterways. Fantastic fun to be catching trout that they put in there, both brown and rainbow. Light gear, small bait, small hooks will catch fish, and sometimes they can bite all day. It's fantastic fun and it's well worth getting out there. So it's one of those things you can look for, but once again, stream craft is important. Look for the deeper holes, use simple baits or even power bait to get those fish like this one in. Stream craft is all about locating fish. So sometimes just a walk around a lake or along a riverbank can identify fish even during winter. If you can find those fish, sometimes all you have to do is drop a bait in front of them. Fish hold next to structure. Here I'm casting a spot right in front of this pylon where the water slows right down and the fish will hold waiting for bait to come through. When it's freezing cold, it's more likely that you'll catch fish holding in these positions than anywhere else. And of course here I was fishing the Golden River, and while there were only carp about on the day, it was fantastic to get a few fish. I could go out and just by using a bit of stream craft, working out the likely places. There was a couple of big branches in there where they would hold. There was the bridge pylon where they would hold. Casting to these spots, moving around a little bit, I managed to land a fish or two. Now, while this was a carp, it's just as likely that there could have been a cod or another Australian native or even a redfin holding in that position next to that pylon, waiting for a bait. Now, shortly after catching that carp, things dried up a little bit, so I moved position. I just did the same thing. I found a little bit of still water here on the same river, just probably 20 paces away, and I cast into that. There might only be one fish in there, and it seems there probably was, which is this one here, another carp, but it was good to catch a couple of fish on the day. So when you're looking for a spot, when you're using your stream craft, you want to look for what a fish will find comfortable. They're not feeding that heavily in winter, but they will take a bait that's dropped next to them. They are more likely to hold in the deeper water where the temperatures are more consistent. They'll hold next to structure where they feel safe, or they'll hold in an area where they don't have to swim hard against the current, like in this area where I just caught this carp. Now, a fish of this size gives you a bit of a fight. It feels great, trying to get this thing out of the snags and working hard to make sure you get that fish in. So that is really good. And look, you just never know. Some of these fish in this waterway get very, very big, and on occasion, Your gear might give up on you, but there is a chance of catching stuff that is quite a bit bigger. Now this fish was caught in summer, but it was still there in winter, and so I could have caught this in winter if I'd put a bait in front of it. Fish are not the only things that come out in winter. Murray crays become very active. In the waterways in Victoria, north of the Great Dividing Range, these things become very, very active and they will take your bait. Here I caught this one accidentally on a size 6 hook. I wasn't targeting them, but they were taking my bait all day. You can catch them with hoop nets and they're beautiful to eat, but I usually return them. Our bay beaches can be great fishing in winter, and I've often found that they fish better, they give a better quality fish when it gets cold. Here I wasn't casting out that far, I was actually fishing in fairly shallow water, but the fish were there. The right bait, bit of burley, small hooks was bringing the fish in, and they weren't necessarily small fish despite the small hooks that I was using. The important thing is to find structure in the water like gutters, rock, weed, and fish next to them. And as far as bait goes, worms are fantastic, and of course chicken, the universal bait, and it always helps to have a little bit of a bait dip to give it that extra enhancement. All make good fishing. And then finally, burley and burley cages, and any type of additive that you can put into the water will actually bring the fish around. If you're fishing fresh water, then smaller amounts are better. If you're fishing the salt water, it seems that they can take just about any amount of burley and pellets that you put in there. Once again, if you're fishing any waterway that is influenced by tides, then fishing the incoming tide, especially towards the top of the tide, and then an hour afterwards is going to give you the best fishing conditions. So if you can get the attractants into the water and fish the right times, especially if you fish morning and evening, you have a chance of catching a fish. Low light levels really seem to be a trigger for fish to bite. So the transition from light to dark or dark to light, so the two ends of the day, seem to be really good for fish to bite and feed. And sometimes those periods can be very short. Here I fished early morning. It was pretty darn cold. There was a bit of a breeze. It was unpleasant, but the fact is the fish were biting. All I did was cast next to some structure in the water, which was just some rocks with a little bit of weed on it. I didn't cast into it, but I cast next to it. I got my burley going and the fish were biting. And some of these fish fight very, very well, especially fish with a broad body like Bream and like pinkies. They really create a lot of resistance in the water, which makes the fight so much harder. It's fantastic on light gear, and you don't need to spend a lot of money on gear to actually be able to catch some fish. Whatever you do, make sure you take a range of baits because the fish can be very, very picky at times. I was using prawn, I was using chicken, I was using bread, I was using worm. Everything seemed to be working. I was getting bites on everything. But on this particular day, I think the prawn was the thing that won, and I was getting good fish off that. But if I hadn't have had the prawn with me, I wouldn't have perhaps got fish of this quality. It's great to be out there. Winter fishing can give you fish like this. And if you're willing to brave the cold, then you can be rewarded for it. The only thing is that sometimes the conditions are really, really tough. It's windy, it's wet, and it's cold. So what do? You go salmon fishing, of course. When the conditions get really, really rough, when the temperature drops, the winds pick up, and it's just horrible being out in this, then that's when the predators come in. This type of rough activity will push the small bait fish around, and the predators like salmon come in, and that is a fantastic target when you're actually fishing in these bay beaches. The great thing about it is they can get pretty big. There's lots of small ones about, but there are also some pretty quality fish around there, especially if you fish into the evening and you fish with the right baits. Things like pilchard and whole fish baits will actually bring in quality like this. These are beautiful Australian salmon.